So in this session, I would like to welcome Ms. Monica McDevitt, Chief Chemicals and Health Branch, United Nations Environment Program, who will chair the session. Monica is an environmental physiologist, having received her BSc, MSc, and doctorate in plant biotechnology and genetic engineering in Canada. For the past 30 or so years, she has worked extensively in applied science and technology innovation in the fields of agriculture, forestry, and coastal and marine development. Prior to joining the UN Environment Program, her work experience in Canada and South Africa included academia, policy implementation, environmental decision support systems, environmental assessments, multi-stakeholder and private sector partnerships, small, medium, and micro enterprise technology transfer, and capacity development. Monica has incorporated her multidisciplinary science and technology background to environmental policy through her work at UNEP at the regional level, partnership management as the Deputy Director at UNEP WCMC, and later as Deputy Director and Chief of the Capacity Development and Scientific Assessment branches in UNEP's Science Division. Until mid-January 2020, Monica was Deputy Director and headed the Operations and Program Delivery branch of UNEP's Ecosystems Division. She is now Chief of the Chemicals and Health branch in UNEP's Economy Division, overseeing UNEP's work in chemical, waste, pollution, and health, e-mobility, and the strategic partnership on waste management at the International Environment Technology Center located in Osaka, Japan. Ms. McDevitt, the floor is yours, the mic is yours, and the session is in your hands to take it forward. Thank you very much, and welcome once again.
Thank you very much, Mr. Misra, and thank you for the opportunity to moderate this very important session. Without further ado, I would like to just introduce our very distinguished panel today. We have with us Mr. Gangwa, Mr. Rolf Payet, Mr. Ganesan, and Mr. Agarwal, and Dr. Kumar. Let me just give you a very quick rundown of their biographies, because they are in fact very illuminating, and I think we're very privileged to be able to have this panel together. So let me introduce to you Mr. Rolf Payet. He is the Executive Secretary of the Basel, Rotterdam, and Stockholm Conventions. He was appointed Executive Secretary in October of 2014 and was previously Minister of Environment and Energy in the Seychelles. He was also the first President and Vice Chancellor at the University in the Seychelles. Very distinguished career. He is currently also the Associate Professor at the University of Linnaeus in Sweden, and previously had contributed to the work of the IPCC, in which, as you know, the IPCC won a Nobel Prize in 2007. He has served on numerous global forums, such as the World Bank Blue Ribbon Panel, UN Group of Experts for the Regular Process on Global Monitoring and Assessment of the State of the Marine Environment, the Global Forum on Oceans, Coasts, and Islands, and is the interim coordinator of the Nairobi Convention of the UNEP Regional Seas Program. Rolf is also a founding member of a number of conservation-oriented foundations, such as the Global Island Partnership, the Sea Level Rise Foundation, the Seychelles University Foundation, the Seychelles Center for Marine Research and Technology, and the Island Conservation Society and the Silhouette Foundation. He has received numerous international awards and recognition for his work and his dedication, including a Young Global Leader by the World Economic Forum and an honorary doctorate in science from the University of London. So welcome, Rolf, to this panel. I would also like to introduce Mr. Ganesan, who is the chairman of the International Treaties of the Indian Chemical Council. Mr. Ganesan has a professional qualification in agricultural sciences and environmental law. He is associated with Indian Chemical Council, the ICC, and in his capacity as chairman for the ICC's International Treaties Expert Committee. He has over 2 decades of experience representing ICC in the International Chemicals Conventions, especially the Stockholm Convention and Rotterdam Convention. He is currently the Vice President Corporate Affairs with UPL Limited in Mumbai. Welcome very much. Let me introduce to you Dr. Rakesh Kumar. He is the Director of the CSIR NIRI in Nagpur, which is a Stockholm Convention Regional Center. Dr. Kumar obtained his MTech in Environmental Science and Engineering from IIT Bombay and his PhD in environmental engineering from RTM Nagpur University. Before assuming the charge of director of the CSIR National Environmental Engineering Research Institute in May 2016, he was the chief scientist and head of CSIR Niri Mumbai's Zonal Center. He has vast experience in a number of fields of environmental science and engineering, especially air pollution control and management, urban air quality monitoring, emissions inventory and modeling, environmental impact assessment, environmental audit, climate change, and health. Dr. Kumar has given a notable contribution in developing technologies for reuse and recycle of domestic and industrial wastewater, which brought a paradigm shift in the country. His efforts have always been for the upliftment and application of science and technology for sustainable development. His work has recently been awarded a Hiroshi Think and Ecology Award in September 2015 for the work he has done on the use of ecology in solving environmental engineering problems. Recently in 2020, he has received a Green Excellence Award in Environmental Protection category for providing innovative solutions for wastewater treatment. He has also served as adjunct professor at the Center for Environmental Science and Engineering at IIT in Bombay. Dr. Kumar also has 10 patents on pollution control devices, including 2 international patents, and has published more than 100 papers in national and international journals, and more than 90 papers in national and international conferences. So welcome to the panel as well. We have a very distinguished panel today. We also have Mr. Agarwal, Mr. Ravi Agarwal, and he is the director at Toxic Links. A communications engineer and MBA by training, Ravi pioneered public advocacy-based work in the area of chemicals and waste after over 15 years of professional experience as an entrepreneur and an engineer. He has been part of several policy and legislative processes in India as member of Standards Expert Group on Biomedical Waste, Hazardous Waste Technologies, Plastic Waste Management, amongst others. He has led the campaign for the fight for the Delhi Ridge Forest for over 15 years and is a member of the Ridge Management Board and Delhi Tree Authority. Mr. Agarwal has written widely on these issues, both in journals as well as in popular media. He has lectured extensively on chemical safety issues besides initiating on-the-ground initiatives. Internationally, he has worked closely with agencies like the WHO and UNEP for initiatives on hazardous waste trade, mercury, technological options for biomedical waste treatment, and lead in paints. He has participated as an NGO representative in the formulation of several international and multilateral treaty processes, including the Stockholm Convention on POPs and the Basel Convention, the SICEM process, as well as ongoing negotiations on the Mercury Treaty. Mr. Agarwal was awarded the IFCS WHO Special Recognition Award for Chemical Safety in 2008 and the Ashoka Fellowship in 1998. He's a keen bird watcher and is also a well-known artist, photographer, and curator, having participated in several important shows nationally and internationally. Welcome to the panel. I believe that I have introduced everyone. So without further ado, I will turn over to Mr. Rolf Payette. He is our first speaker in this panel, and Rolf will be speaking with his slides, and I will ask Rolf to put up his slides now. Thank you, Rolf. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Monica, and a very good afternoon to you all, and of course for those of us on this side of the world, a very good morning. Can we put up the slide, please? Or shall I put up my slide?
I think, Rolf, if you're able to put up your slides, you can go ahead.
All right, okay, I'll do that. Okay, do you see it now?
Yes, we can see your slides. Can you put them on slide view?
Yes, I'm gonna do that in a minute.
Mr. Rolf, if you're fine with it, I can run it from the background and you can speak.
No, I'm already showing.
We're good now.
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much. So we will start with my first slide. And as you know, we have the Conference of the Parties coming up this year. We're still not sure whether it's going to be a fully face-to-face meeting or split into two parts or have a virtual meeting. As you know, over several thousand delegates come to our conference of the parties, and we have the three conventions meeting together over 2 weeks. So it will be a bit of a juggle if we try to do it online. So we'll be advising everyone later on what will be the format of that meeting, which will be towards the end of July of this year. There's also planned a high-level segment, and this high-level segment is done more or less every 4 years, where we invite both ministers as well as senior representatives of companies and industry to sit together and at least agree on a statement, either to renew their commitments to address sustainable chemicals management or to come up with new issues and areas of work that they want to achieve at the policy level. The theme for this year is Global Agreements for a Healthy Planet, the sound management of chemicals and waste. Basically, the theme is really trying to show that global agreements do have a role to play in advancing environmental issues, but also in creating the space for us to look at more sustainable solutions, especially in industry. So we have a lot of technical work ongoing, both at the scientific and technical levels. We have technical guidelines, a number of technical guidelines being developed on plastic waste, on persistent organic pollutant waste, mercury waste, electronic waste, also on disposal in landfills and in incineration on land. We also have work with the World Customs Organization in the classification and hazard characterization of waste. As you know, this is very important, and especially in many of the countries that have facilities for dealing with waste or who wish to export waste. There's also guidance on national reporting. This is important because it helps us to keep track of transboundary movement of waste and different types of waste, especially, as you know, the increase in the transboundary movement of batteries and waste batteries, especially with the growth in electronic materials and electronic components. And of course, the big work is continuing on plastic waste and also on nanomaterials. There's also work being done on legal compliance and governance matters, both in terms of strengthening countries to manage chemicals in a sustainable manner, and also the review of the different annexes with regards to entries for e-waste and other types of waste. There's also work being done on strategic matters. And as you know, the ban amendment came into force on the 5th December. And just last week, we celebrated our 100th party who joined this ban amendment, which really effectively stops OECD from exporting waste to those countries that have decided to sign up. In terms of listing of chemicals, we have a number of chemicals being put forward for listing under Annex 3 of the Convention, which has already been under the Rotterdam Convention, which are being put forward, I'm mixing up my slides here. We have PFOA, we have decabromo-diphenyl ether, we have acetylchlor, we have carbosulfan, we have chrysotile asbestos, which is coming back again, we have phentan, which is coming back again, and then we have paraquat, which is coming back again for listing under the COP. And we have discussions on the compliance mechanism, which is an important mechanism under the Rotterdam to really ensure and support countries in the implementation of the Rotterdam Convention. Under the Stockholm Convention, we just had the scientific meeting last week, and the next conference of the parties will look at PFH excess, its salts and other related compounds, and also we'll look at exemptions for decabromo-diphenyl ether and short-chain chlorinated paraffins. The COP will also look at DDT and also BDEs. In terms of effectiveness evaluation of the Stockholm Convention, the committee will start its work. As you know, the work was mandated at the last COP, and this work has been ongoing, especially looking at how effective the Stockholm Convention has been throughout its period of implementation. So in terms of partnerships, this is where we work very much closely with stakeholders in the private sector. We have a number of these partnerships. As you know, we started the mobile phone partnership where a number of guidelines were made. We have Enforce, which is a partnership with enforcement agencies as well as the regional centers, and also different countries are engaged. And following that, we had the follow-up to the partnership on computer equipment, and the work is ongoing on this. Then we also have the household waste partnership, and most recently the plastic waste partnership, which now probably is our largest partnership with over 125 members, and about half of those coming from industry. In terms of the household partnership, if you are interested, the slides I think will be available, but due to time consideration, I won't go over it. In terms of the partnership on computing equipment as well, I won't go into the details, but that concerns mobile phone computing equipment, and of course, the environmentally sound management of electronic waste. The plastic waste partnership, as I mentioned before, is a new partnership. And this goal of this partnership, of course, is recognizing that countries need support and help in order to address the plastic waste crisis. And I know for one that India has been really progressive in addressing plastic waste with a number of policies at the national level, but also a number of activities taken by industry and also at the local level. So really, why am I thinking of China? India is really moving forward on this issue, and I think there's a lot of scope for more work in that area in India. In terms of partnerships on the Stockholm Convention, we have two main partnerships, and this is the Global DDT Alliance, and the second one is the PCB Elimination Network. So in terms of engagement with non-state actors, including the private sector, there are different opportunities for them to engage. First, they can participate in all our meetings, expert group meetings, and even the Conference of the Parties as observers. And of course, we've been engaging with industry, including the International Chemistry Council, over many years now. They can also partner through the Basel and Stockholm Conventions regional centers. As you know, there is a regional center in India as well for Stockholm, and they can partner with that center as well. There's also a lot of exchange of information. We also do side events, briefings, and also work together to advance knowledge on sustainable management of both chemicals and also waste. There is also, as I mentioned before, partnerships, coalitions, and also alliances. So this is just a quick overview of the regional centers that we have around the world. And you can see there's the Stockholm Regional Center based in India. So with those few words, I'd like to thank you and, of course, welcome the discussion. I've just presented you very quickly here a very quick overview of the work that we do and how we interface with stakeholders. Thank you very much, Monica, and over to you.
Great, thank you very much for that, Rolf, and thank you very much for keeping on time, because we do have some really important questions to sort of dive a little bit deeper into your presentation. So let me just, before I move to the next speaker, I'll ask you a question because everyone's mind is on to what you just said. So as you know, 2021 is an important year for the global chemicals and waste management agenda, considering issues such as ICCM 5 being postponed to this year, the BRS COPs and the NAMATA COP. How do you see that these synergies can be established amongst these MEAs in terms of concrete synergy and complementarity? Can you give us a couple of comments on that?
Yes, I mean, yes, we've had lockdowns and we've had to change our approach to work, but we have not stopped working. In fact, we've been busier than before. I mean, even I, in the past, I had to travel to a meeting, and that cost a lot of time. But now I have to sit in front of my computer and attend meetings, which means that I can attend a meeting today in India, and this evening, and I can attend a meeting in the US or in Latin America, for example, without leaving my seat. Now, yes, there are challenges with this, but it has given us, I think, a great opportunity to interface into different forums. And in terms of working with other MEAs, I think it has also helped us to to save the time that we had spent traveling is to really engage a bit more. So despite the fact that we've been working virtually, it has allowed us to engage a bit more, look at new initiatives, see how we can work. Of course, the challenges of doing actual things on the ground has been difficult, but a number of the challenges that we had in the past was coordination and really exchanging views, and we've been able to do that quite a bit over the last few, well, it's going to be a year since we've been under lockdown. So we've tried to go past the challenges and rather look at the opportunities, and I think it has helped us. Yes, the big meetings have been a challenge and will continue to be a challenge, but I think with the vaccinations coming up on the horizon and better management of infections, I think we will be able to implement those those benefits gained during the lockdown, and hopefully that will help us to move forward a bit better.
Great. Thank you for that, Rolf. And I think it's something that we've all experienced this year as well. Let me just ask you one very important question, because as we know, the conventions really are a convention of the parties of member states. But a really important component to the delivery and implementation of the work is with the industry. Can you give us some idea of how the convention interacts with industries?
Yes, well, the primary mode of interaction is through the associations, because, industries, there's so many industries. I mean, in the chemical sector, there's hundreds of thousands of industries in different regions of the world, and it's very difficult to interact with each and every one of them. But what our strategy has been to interact with them through the main industry associations, like the American Chemistry Council, the international associations, the regional associations. So we've been trying. And when I visited India I think it was 3 or 4 years ago, I met with the Indian Chemistry Council as well. I think that's the right name. So I do take the opportunity wherever I'm traveling to meet with the industry councils if they are present in those countries, so that we can establish links and, of course, have an open conversation, because some of the chemicals being listed are of concern to those chemical industries. And at the same time, it's important that we do exchange what we have, and they also exchange what they have, whether it's concerns or new areas of work. Secondly, we also I've been attending a lot of industry meetings. So instead of them coming to me, I'm also going to them, and it's a great platform to meet with concerned industry, and that has opened a lot of bilateral conversations with especially large chemical companies, but also with the smaller ones as well.
Great, thank you for that. And I think that's a very good way to move on to our next speaker, who is Mr. Ganesan, and he's our industry representative. So let's just check that we can have his video and his audio correct. Mr. Ganesan, do you want to come onto the screen, please, and come onto the podium?
I think Mr. Ganesan is still having.
Is he still having problems?
He's still having some technical issues, so I think you move on to the next. And in case there are some questions, then in case he's not able to answer, then you can put it to me, then I can respond on behalf of the Indian chemical industry.
Okay, well, that's a shame, and I hope we can perhaps solve the technical problems over the course of the next couple of speakers. So in that case, let me go to our next speaker on the panel, which is Mr. Ravi Agarwal. He's the director of Toxic Link. And so may I turn the floor over to you, Mr. Agarwal.
Thank you, Monica, and thank you, Yunus, and Mr. Atul Bagai for inviting us to this forum. It's a very important meeting, and I've had the honor and occasion to listen to some of these speakers and some of the panels over the past 2 days, which are very informative and very encouraging to see this being taken up by the Chemical Council. I'll just start from basics that, we understand that chemicals are a very broad term, and it's very hard to speak of them in just one particular sort of narrow frame. And we also everybody should acknowledge that they're well integrated into modern society. However, in their life cycle, they also have harmful public health and environmental health impacts. And unfortunately, they are differentially so on the more vulnerable groups, such as women, agricultural workers, children, and also other non-human species. So
Delegates and
these
officials from
groups
Indian
also have
government.
less ability to protect themselves from these harms. So it becomes incumbent on us as all stakeholders to make sure that while we use chemicals, the harmful effects of the chemicals are not propagated, or we find substitutes, or we find other ways of dealing with these impacts. And to our mind, having as an organization which has engaged for this on this subject for over 30 years, we feel multi-stakeholder approaches are the only way ahead. In fact, there is no other way of thinking of public health and environmental sustainability. And I'd like to add one more word to this multi-stakeholder is interdisciplinarity, which is, of course, many people are talking about, but we also have to look at the multiple kinds of ways and multiple kinds of systems, methods through which we can approach this problem. And in this, every stakeholder has a role. The academia has a very important role. The industry is, of course, the key player. The government has a very important key role, actually. And civil society has a very important role as it. And these all have been acknowledged in the approaches of the UNEP approaches, UN approaches, where organizations which are non-governmental are, including industry, are constantly invited and to participate, to listen in, and also to contribute through many forums. And I'll talk a bit more about the SICEM process in a couple of moments. Now, some of the chemical impacts we know are of long-term nature, and that's one of the problems because we cannot easily identify these impacts. And taking them into account or recognizing them easily is difficult, especially for developing countries which have many other priorities. And looking at chemicals and their long-term impacts takes a lot of resources and a change of priorities. For example, if you take things like endocrine disrupting chemicals, now they can impact multiple life forms at genetic levels. But the toxicity issues are increasingly well recognized, and they are being dealt with in the multilateral environmental treaties, the Basel, the Stockholm Convention, the Mercury Convention, which have a lot of basic scientific basis to their progress and how they go around it. So the challenges are great, especially for developing and less developed countries. And this is also recognized now in the Sustainable Development Goals of 2030, which I'll also mark a little bit more in the next couple of minutes. Now, it is not possible to speak of the chemical industry with but one broad stroke. It is highly diverse and heterogeneous, and all kinds of actors, like civil society. There are all kinds of actors in these broad spectrum. But I think we need to recognize that we need to be inclusive and transparent for a forward-looking approach, so that we solve these problems slowly. And I think one of the key things which has to be done is to acknowledge that there is a problem. I think that's where some of the issues start, that acknowledging that there is a problem and that we need to do something about it. And I think there is enough work being done and enough possibility of making those changes once we do that. We have a long history as an organization of working with all stakeholders. In fact, most of the work we do deals with all stakeholders. Lead in paints is a very good example. We helped bring it to the SICEM process after resolution in the then existing IFCS, and then it was taken up as a global issue. And in India too, lead in paints was led by some of the major lead in paint industry, which started leading the issue. And it is with their example that other people also started to change. So biomedical waste, electronic waste, there are so many examples where leadership within the chemical industry makes a big difference in how this diverse industry starts to slowly change. Civil society actors do not have independent power and influence of the industry. industry is the key player, and working with them is something which is extremely important. And trust building is very key in this. And sometimes there is a lack of trust on both sides. But we all recognize, because of the planetary reports and the planetary systems we are dealing with, that it is not time for business as usual anymore. Environmental sustainability needs changes from the old approaches, and even new approaches like circular economy need interventions. For example, safe materials for recycling. How do you ensure that the materials introduced back into circular economy are safe? How do you recycle them safely? These all deal with issues of chemical life cycles. Now, just a bit on SICAM. The SICAM is a very good example of multi-stakeholder approach. It catalyzes, enables multi-stakeholder, multi-sectoral efforts to achieve chemical safety and to minimize or eliminate all sources of toxic exposure. It provides opportunities for information exchange, knowledge sharing, support, encouragement to government officials with national responsibilities for chemical management. And it has a broad scope to cover many kinds of chemical exposures that lie outside the framework of current chemical treaties. For example, I remember participating very closely with the Governing Council discussions, which led to the UNEP Mercury Treaty, which is now called the Minamata Treaty. And it took a long time to get all the science in place to then come to a legally binding agreement. But SICAM is a voluntary agreement, and I think it has great advantages in some areas which are not easy to deal with in legally binding situations. So the framework it provides, it enables governments, public interest, civil society, community groups, UN agencies, private sector, health sector, trade union, all the relevant actors are allowed have a position, equal position to collaborate and to bring in new issues and to take them forward to be adopted by other agencies and have global leadership. It is, to my mind, one of the only global forums where the full range of known and newly discovered health and environmental concerns associated with chemical life cycles can be identified, assessed, and addressed. And as we know from the list of the priority items of SICAM, it has brought in things like lead in paints, electronic waste, the highly hazardous pesticides issues, which through things like the Global Alliance to Eliminate Lead in Paints and the decisions of the ICC M4 on highly hazardous pesticides are some examples of where we can go with this. So I think this is at the global level, this multi-stakeholder has rule-based. It is possible as an organizational level. But also at a national level, I think we need to find ways in which to stimulate these conversations, which I think a lot to do with building trust. We have played a big role in raising some of these issues like lead in paints, which was then taken up at the global level. And of course, there are several examples, again, talking to the diversity of the chemical industry. For example, the medium and small sector, the challenges are different than the large sector has or the tiny sector has. So in a developing country like India, we have to be conscious that all the solutions don't fit one kind of, it cannot have one size fit all, and you have to look at each sector, each scale of sector differently. Just a bit on the moving towards 2020, the SICAM and the Sustainable Development Goals. Now, it is well recognized in the Sustainable Development Goals that sound management of chemicals and waste is a specific target, especially under things like points like the SDG 12 on sustainable consumption and production. Chemicals, waste, and air quality are also referred to under SDG 3. On good health and well-being in SDG 3, as I said. SDG 6 on clean water and sanitation. SDG 7 on affordable and clean energy. SDG 11 on sustainable cities and communities. SDG 14 on life below water, where things like plastics, marine plastics and microplastics play a very large landscape role. So I think the implementing the SICAM in the SDGs and putting them together is going to be a very important challenge. And also, as SciChem is based in a development agenda, not only in an environmental agenda, it has all the other possible stakeholders to be brought in and to be addressed in a cross-cutting chemical safety way. Because many of these issues like financing, questions of voluntary or mandatory, where to be voluntary, where it leads to mandatory approaches, the national action plans, these are very critical to deal with chemical management. And I think these frameworks are already existing. So I think just to reiterate some of the points that as a civil society actor for a long time, I think working with trust and respect is the way ahead. Because multi-stakeholders bring in different kind of capacities, different kinds of possibilities, and different ways in which how these problems are perceived, understood, and solved. We cannot solve these problems in isolation. Community participation is very critical. And the other thing very critical is leadership in the chemical industry. We worked with the chemical industry, for example, in the issue of paints, where we've seen very strong leadership. And we've seen how leadership, innovation, and substitutions become very critical in triggering the whole sector. So it requires that kind of approach. And finally, political ownership of the problem is key. And I saw the letter from the Honorable Prime Minister, which was sent to the meeting, and he also marks out some of the issues, like single-use plastics. So there is, you can see political ownership happening at that level. It's up to us, how do we meet the political challenge? And how do we try and move forward in this area? So I'll just stop at that and hand it back to you. Thank you.
Super. Thank you very much for that, Mr. Agarwal. And I think you've raised so many good points and so many, I think, necessary learnings that we all need to share and to benefit from. But let me just ask you very quickly, because I am conscious of time, that how can you? What are some of the real mechanisms for constructive stakeholder engagement with government in particular? And let's keep it in the Indian context with the government of India. In terms of implementing the MEAs, what is that constructive role, and how does it look in terms of actual progress on the ground?
I think civil society has outreach where other stakeholders don't easily have. They play a key role in a vast country, a very diverse country like India, reach out at the community level. They have those kinds of stakes and stakeholders which are part of them. And we saw this in the COVID-19 crisis, that in the ongoing COVID-19, that a lot of the civil society actors reached out and dealt with the issues of waste, dealt with the issues of health and safety and hygiene at the community level. So it's a very, very important partnership. But in other areas as well, for example, in looking at awareness, research, focusing on areas which are not easily focused on, looking at vulnerabilities in society where people might be more impacted than others through science-based approaches, and also providing a forum for multi-stakeholder conversations. I remember in the electronic waste issue, after we did the first report in 2009, there was a coming together of industry and civil society in a group to suggest a draft notification to the government of India as a joint civil society and industry draft. And I think it helped speed in the process because government said there's ownership of the whole problem. So I think with a constructive approach, we can come together and try and find the way to move ahead. So there are many, many ways in which, because civil society has a public interest by definition at stake, and the industry has its own kinds of inherent ways of working and difficulties in moving to new systems. How do we enable this? And so I think there are many, many ways in which ultimately it's the government which is going to take anything forward. The government is the key stakeholder, in terms of legislation, regulation, or requirements, setting societal norms. So, but when you come together to government with these possibilities, then the government also finds it easy to act.
Great. No, thank you for that. And I think it's a very good answer in terms of the levels of government that have to work together with civil society, from the community to the national level and putting into the global. So thank you very much for that. And we'll come back perhaps with some later questions. And I think, that then feeds in very nicely to our next speaker, and we'll go to Dr. Rakesh Kumar, who's the director of the CSIR NERI, and he's going to talk to us a little bit on the importance of institutional strengthening for effective implementation of MEAs in India. So Dr. Kumar, with no further ado, over to you.
Thank you, Monica, and all the panelists here. Most of the important points have been already covered, so I'll get into the specifics of the topic that we were discussing here today. Besides NERI, Stockholm Region Center, is also working on various environmental related issues. So starting from waste to hazardous waste to air pollution related issues and wastewater, where we have all kind of cocktails which come in. What we realize is that when we talk about institutional system, we
Sorry, Dr. Kumar, you've turned your mute button on. Can you try unmuting?
Yeah, can you hear me now? So what probably I missed out the last sentence was that when we talk about institutions in any country for that matter, I think it's the interlinkages of the institutions which make things work or don't work. And when we are looking at any of these conventions or the treaties which are getting implemented in specific countries, I will leave the treaties for some time aside. What is important to first notice is whether the legislations that we have, existing Indian legislations, are they getting implemented, and for that whether institutional system is working. So when we look at the history of legislation in India, we had only one act in 1974, which was Water Act, Water Pollution and Prevention Act. In 1981, we got Air Pollution Prevention Act, and after the Bhopal tragedy in 1984, we got an Umbrella Act in 1986, and from there, if we count, we have more than 93 legislations as of now, 93. And of these 93, almost 20, approximately 22 of them are related to the topic that we are discussing today here. So when we are doing this analysis of institutional capacity, we find that in our country we do have all the right institutions in place, but probably they're not talking to each other the way they have been structured. And that was the reason of our discussion, or I would say the workshop that we organized last year, and how do we get them all together. And Ministry of Environment and Forest here has agreed kind of to work towards making that institutional system work. So we created this directorate called Chemicals and Waste, in which Dr. Ganeshan was also there, and ICC members were also there, and we got some more people. So first we realized was to get all the people who are connected with with the research institutions, because they are the ones who generate all the kind of data which are relating to toxicity, the transport, different media of transport, whether it's soil, air, or water, toxicity, and also transport, health related different media. So the data relating to health is something which is very, very meager and very limited, which is there in our country. And that's where we got all these institutions which were getting partial funding from Department of Science and Technology or DBT or any other places. So we have started this process, and this whole process will actually need a lot of backing from the respective ministries. And I'm sure, although the MOEFCC colleagues are not here, but they need to also move in this particular activity in a way that it actually works out in a way that it actually works very effectively and also connects people. The second very important thing is not only the rules and regulations of connecting people, it is also the faith and the trust of each other on the data which gets collected, the study which gets done, the way it gets communicated is very, very important. And that's where I see the role of a person like Ravi Agrawal or ICC members here, to take it forward and bring in that faith and trust. And only when that happens, the institutional mechanism will effectively seem to be working. We may claim that it's working, but it can work better compared to what we have today. As of now, I'll stop here and I can take specific questions if you have, and then we move forward. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much for that, Dr. Kumar. And yes, you've added a lot of richness to the conversation that we've had already. And I do have a couple of questions for you. So I will ask you, what role do you see the regional center, the CSIR NERI, playing in supporting the government of India and other stakeholders in the country in terms of providing technical and policy inputs for the implementation of the multilateral environmental agreements or the conventions that you spoke of? So, what is the specific role of your center as a technology provider?
So, to give you a small brief, we have different divisions and department, which we call it. So we are stationed in Nagpur, which is the center of India geographically, and we do have 5 regional centers. So in 5 different metros: Mumbai, Delhi, Chennai, Kolkata, and Hyderabad. But besides that, what is important here is that we have very specific department which work on not only on the R&D of studies with respect to chemicals impact, but we also look at their management, and we also look at technology. So we have hazardous waste management division, which looks at all hazardous waste and chemicals. We have air pollution control division, where we look at all the air pollution related issues. We have division which specifically looks at waste management aspect of municipal solid waste. And the fourth one, which is very, very critical one, is the wastewater. So all of these things together are making a robust place where we have more than 200 scientific and technical staff which are working in this area, and they can possibly be able to address almost all aspects of environment related issues. So that's the strength that we have. In addition to that, what I wanted to also share is that in this directorate and the center that got created and has been functional for quite some time, now we are roping in almost all other CSR institutions, of which almost 38 of them across India are going to be partners. We are technically partners, but we are now looking at specific topic-wise partnership, where life cycle assessment related databases are getting now prepared in different sector of industries. Is going one by one. We are looking at all the data which are relating to soil pollution, which comes from National Botanical Research Institute to Bureau of Soil Sciences, as well as from us. We are now looking at all the persistent organic pollutants which have been found in wastewater. And recently we also did for COVID, which is not so persistent, by the way. We assume it's not persistent. So that also has been recently done from our side. Thanks.
Great. No, thank you for clarifying that. And let me just quickly ask Mr. Misra, we have Mr. Ganesan on the line. Is his technology working? Can I turn to him now?
No, somehow today I think it's a bad day for him or around him in technology, because I even suggested, why don't you join from your mobile phone? And then he texted me that perhaps even that's not working. But essentially from the part of Indian Chemical Council, of course, he heads the International Treaties Division. And I've had occasions to attend some of the COP on Stockholm and Rotterdam, but those days when we attended, and I was in the government then, they were separate conventions. You had separate for Stockholm, you had separate for Rotterdam, Basel was separate. And that was the time, this is 2006-07, when the discussion went off that can we have a common one? At that time, there was no secretariat, individual organizations, FAO was hosting one, another organization hosting another. So can we have a common secretariat for these 3 conventions? And I'm very delighted that these 3 conventions are there. From the point of view of Indian Chemical Council, one basic thing sometimes we forget when we talk in terms of managing chemicals, in terms of between Europe and US, there you have large number of big companies, small number of big companies. And we have here in India, and the diversity that Mr. Agarwal mentioned, that we have a large number of small companies. And then you have two sets of people that you need to address. One, you have the larger companies who are members of Responsible Care, who are members of ICC, and they're driving sustainability, and they are the people who are really in front and representing in ICCA and others. Then you have a large number of small companies. One, sometimes they do not have the technology, sometimes they do not have the knowledge, and of course, sometimes they don't know how to move from a more sort of less sustainable technology to a more sustainable technology. So we need to reach out to them. There's need to be much more hand-holding, whether we can do something through SICOM, whether we, through individual projects and programs or through others. So that is number one. Second is that we have these CSR institutions, and they can indeed play a big role in terms of, and therefore I'm delighted, and I think ICC attended that, found the session where you started the center. Our Director General from Mumbai attended it, that we have to bring in the technology, the thinking, the knowledge that is there in the CSR institutions and really make it multi-stakeholder. Third is the outreach. You can do one thing, but ultimately it has to be an outreach. And I'm telling you an example. When I went in 2006, 2007, I was on the other side of the fence. I was defending the use of DDT. I'm still somewhere on the net, on IPEN or somewhere, putting me as an anti kind of person who's defending DDT. The challenge at that time, and the South Africa sort of even supported us, that ultimately you needed something to protect the people from internal use of vector control against malaria. Now you say, okay, we'll have permethrin impregnated mosquito nets. And of course, HIL, which was making DDT, is now going into mosquito nets. Now we need to see, you go to the tribal areas, we need to have a complete reach out. That do the tribals sleep on beds? Do they have the sticks by which, the facilities by which they can put up the mosquito nets? If they use the mosquito net, if they wash it, will the permethrin get washed away? How do you bring that in? So we really need to think from the entire perspective of protection of the environment, of sustainability, and all from whether it's a POP or so we need for that. Then secondly, we stop it. And third, how other customers or consumers are going to use it. But from the Indian Chemical Council side, you can rest assured, and we are grateful for the partnership. Indian Chemical Council is very, very committed. Even yesterday in the discussions, earlier also, we have been talking that the larger companies that are members of Responsible Care and others, how can they reach out to their suppliers and others, make their sort of work sustainable? How can they help them in safety issues? So this is what I want to share, that the Indian Chemical Council is interacting. It's a really a broader kind of a action that we deal with government in terms of supporting the regulations. Even this morning, there was a presentation on because the government is thinking of having a number of safety and other regulations that Dr. Rakesh Kumar mentioned, of a large number that can be consolidated into national chemical rules. So that process is also going on. That consultation is also going on. So we are with UNEP, we are with all the stakeholders, we are with Mr. Agarwal in sharing that it's not trying to protect any particular thing, but we are working for the environment and sustainability of the environment. So I hope I've thrown in terms of the commitment of the industry for this towards this approach. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much for your intervention, and thank you for speaking on behalf of the industry as well, where we couldn't have Mr. Ganesan in there. So I'm watching the time very carefully because I don't want to have us run over time too much. So with that, let me just provide perhaps some summary comments from what I've taken away from the individual speakers, and I hope will help to represent the discussion that we've had here already today. And let me sort of start by sort of reminding us of the important role that the multilateral environmental agreements play, and the key role that they have in supporting the countries to fulfill their both ambitions and their obligations toward a pollution-free planet, especially under the 3 conventions mandates in the BRS family, as we heard from Rolf. I think we also heard a lot of key messages about the responsible use and management of chemicals, and in this, the important role of both a rich and diverse stakeholder group who bring their perspectives and their concerns and solutions to the table. I think we really need to do that, and we have heard that through a number of our speakers. Also really important to take a holistic view of well-being, and this is something that Mr. Agarwal brought up, to include the impacts of chemicals in the environment and the impact on the rest of nature's living things, including the role that they bring in our own health and well-being. And so we have to look beyond ourselves, but include ourselves as well. We also need to look at the key role of industry leadership in problem solving and upscaling and extending solutions across industry sectors. Some of the learning may be appropriate in terms of both process and final end solution to various problems that we can share across the industry and across the sectors. So that's a really important thing, upscaling and extending the work that we do. We also heard some really good examples of how global multi-stakeholder processes such as SciChem are useful in setting an example for national dialogue amongst stakeholders and across sectors. So that's, I think, a really important thing to internalize in terms of how that sets the opportunity for national stakeholders, and it also then creates a powerful platform to feed into global processes, whether it be SciChem or Minamata or the BRS or any other of the global conventions. So that was a really important part of learning that I picked up from listening to the panelists. We also need to look at the important role that institutions play, but not only institutions in themselves, but the interlinkages amongst the institution. And that's something that Mr. Kumar brought up, or Dr. Kumar brought up very clearly, is that it's fine to have each individual institution being strong and capacitated and coming up with solutions and policy recommendations based on very sound science and data and information. But how do they all work together so that when we talk about government, we have government that sings in harmony with itself across its institutions? And I think that's really important that we keep that in mind. We know that individual institutions and policies are important, but that relationship among them needs to be considered so that we avoid any counterproductive efforts that might come out of well-meaning policies, but that we rather work toward mutually reinforcing and communicating consistent messages to all stakeholders. That was a really important part, Dr. Kumar, Dr. Kumar, so thank you for making that. We also know, and I think fundamentally are grounded in science underpinning policy and also complemented by technology transfer. And having spent many years in the CSIR in South Africa, in working with the CSIR in India, you know, my heart is very much grounded in technology transfer and doing something with what you've done in science. So technology transfer and science underpinning policy is, I think, at the heart of much of what everyone is doing, whether you're coming from industry or from the policy side or from the research side. And I think finally, the diversity of sectors cannot really just be lumped together and say industry or sector. One of the points that came through for me was that all industry players, as Mr. Misra has described, have a unique value that they bring to the table. And what, you know, the big players have to face in terms of challenges and solutions may not be the same as the smaller players in the same industry or in the same sector. So that calls for us to work together and to also understand and hear what people need in terms of finding the right solutions to foster innovation and to really address from the community level to the national level, and how we can in fact share that from a South-South triangular cooperation perspective, and how we can collectively achieve progress under the SDGs. I think in conclusion, we've had a really rich discussion, and I really want to reach out and thank all of our panelists today, and hope that you've enjoyed this panel as well. And I appreciate the opportunity to have all of us present to the audience out there, and I hope they've taken home some of these lessons as well. So my sincere thanks to all of you, and I wish you a good continuation of your day.
Right. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you,
very
Ms.
much,
McDevitt.
Monica.